So if we are always marred by such concepts and such negativity that we have experienced in the past, then all our responses would also be could also be negative and could also be influenced at times by our experiences. So we need to keep in mind that whatever experiences that we have had and whatever knowledge we have had or whatever background we have had, our past has to be kept in perspective, but it should not overshadow our communication process. We have to learn from our past experiences, but at the same time, we do not have to let our past experiences restrict us from making our communication effective. We have this in this picture, different sort of mindsets, different emotions that are sort of depicted in the different masks. Now these elements are all an individual has in his or her mind, which can cause a barrier in communication. Let us quickly, briefly compare these personal barriers with physical barriers. Personal barriers are those barriers which are internal, and physical barriers are external barriers. First element that can sort of prove to be a barrier in communication is status block. As a society, we tend to, in a way, work in our group, in our network, in our circle, and we are very much aware of our status and our position in society. At times, this could prove to be a barrier in communication, both on the personal and the professional front. If we leave our status aside, if we are open-minded enough to approach all individuals and of all ages, of different castes, creeds and religion, irrespective of their background, if we are able to do all this, then our communication would be more effective. If we keep this sort of barrier of status or barrier of or in our mind, then probably we might not be able to communicate as effectively as we would have done without it. So there are instances where communication does not seem to be very effective because that individual does not approach the person with the right mindset. He is always prejudiced about the other person. He shuns the other person, looks down at the other person because of his probably say his status, his designation, or probably because he feels that that other person does not have the sort of the position or standing that he himself has. So if you keep this aspect in mind, that status can prove to be a barrier, and you eliminate that out of your communication, then it will prove to be more effective, and it would prove to be lead you to avenues which you have never imagined existed. So you should not hesitate to talk to a child. You should not hesitate to talk to a person, a teenager or an elderly individual, or think that he is too small to talk to, or he is too big to approach. If you keep such things in mind, or if you constantly shun people who work under you just because you have a higher standing in the professional world and they do not, then your automatically creating barriers around yourself, and this would lead to hindrance in the messages being passed to you. So be open minded, forget about the social block, and approach people without hesitation. Only then you can communicate effectively. At times, this difference of the status of your standing in society can prove to be a difficult obstacle to overcome. While in the social system, there are distinctions of caste, creed, color, and financial background. Now, you should keep in mind that in our system, there is discrimination on the basis of caste, creed, color, religion, and financial background. But we have to always overlook that. We have to be open minded and think about trying to approach people and to communicate with them irrespective of whatever their caste, creed, or religion is. Till the time we hold on to such barriers, we won't be able to communicate effectively, and we would always be marred by obstacle of barrier during our communication. Next element of personal barrier is state of mind and health. Now, if you are close-minded and conservative, then lot many things can happen. If you don't be open-minded about certain aspects, you don't embrace change, and you are constant in trying to judge others, trying to pass the information as you wish, then you might not be able to communicate effectively. So how does this close-mindedness occur? This can occur because of little or no education, because of upbringing, social and economic background. Now, if you are not open-minded enough, then you might not be able to communicate that effectively. And if you lack education, or if you've been brought up in that environment and you're not ready to come out of the seed sown in your childhood, then probably you might not be able to communicate effectively. So open-mindedness is required, tolerance is required, sensitivity and acceptance is required for effective communication. Okay, narrow-mindedness can prove to be a prominent barrier in the path of communication. If you are not broad-minded, if you are not open to the needs of others, if you constantly try to talk of all the things pertaining to you, yourself, and no one else, then your message would not be communicated effectively, because no one would like to listen to it. So broad-mindedness, open-mindedness, and sensitivity to that other person should be important during communication, else it can prove to be a personal barrier. Now we move to the next point, which is group identification. All of us have our networks, we have our circles on the professional and the social level, and at times on the familial level also. Now, human beings are essentially social animals. An individual can seldom exist in isolation or all alone. We can't exist all by ourselves. Just try to imagine that if you are asked to spend one whole day in an empty room all by yourself without talking to any other soul around, and your cell phone in this age, if you are not allowed to use your cell phone for say one day, then how isolated you would feel. Why would this happen? because we have our networks and we like to remain connected to our networks, and this can prove to be a positive factor. At the same time, it can also be a negative factor, because we start identifying groups around us and we hesitate to others belonging to different group, and those groups which are not yours. Now this could happen, and if you try to think in this manner, where you don't approach others simply because they do not belong to your group, then probably you are going to be left out, and number of messages that are passed would not reach you because of your ineffectivity in communication. So this is another aspect which you need to keep in mind. Next, poor communication skills. If you can't communicate properly, then you are not going to be as effective in communication. So you need to communicate effectively. You need to have command over language. Now we move to organizational barriers. In any organization, communication can be hampered, and loss of information can cause lots of problems. There are several levels in an organization, and communication can be altered or distorted when passed from one level to another. Sometimes deliberate withholding of communication can also take place. Communication might be withheld for malicious purpose, and that could also prove to be a barrier in communication. Now we move to cross-cultural barriers. In a globalized world, we have to interact with people of different cultures, with people of different religions, people belonging to different countries. If you are not sensitive to their culture and the meanings that they interpret, then probably this could prove to be a barrier in communication. And each individual has his or her norms and perspectives about his or her own culture. If we are not sensitive to that, then probably our communication will not be that effective. So cross-cultural barriers can occur because of difference in cultural backgrounds. Okay, human beings of different cultures have to interact with each other in this global scenario, and if they don't know about how to communicate with people belonging to different cultures, then probably that could cause a barrier. Let us have a look at the picture here. See, it's a multicultural society, and we have to be sensitive to those of other cultures. Therefore, we have to be sensitive to those of other religion and cultures. Now, let's quickly browse through how we can eliminate these barriers. Measures to eliminate the barriers. Noise can be controlled by installing soundproof systems. We can eliminate the noise. Transmission of the message could also be taken care of. In order to bring clarity in communication, gadgets like microphone, speakers could be checked and repaired periodically and regularly. Semantic barriers can be removed by possessing a sound knowledge of language in terms of words and their meanings. Command over language and the proper use of idioms and phrases can improve the quality of communication. It can enhance the meaning and make communication effective and interesting. Barriers to communication. Finally, let us just conclude with what does barriers mean then. Barriers to communication basically are hurdles or speed breakers in the process of communication. There are a number of barriers to communication and many reasons why communication can fail. We have had a look at all of them. The physical barriers in communication, the linguistic and semantic barriers, the personal barriers, organizational barriers, and cross-cultural barriers. We have also tried to know the measures that we can take. the steps that we can take to eliminate these barriers and make our communication more effective. So all these aspects have to be kept in mind while communicating, and if we are aware of them and take measures to eliminate the barriers, then our communication would be more effective. Our efforts of making the content which needs to be communicated would be put to good use, else it would fail. Okay, finally, to conclude, therefore the message that what is said may not be received exactly the way the sender intended. Here it means that if there are barriers to communication, then message will not be sent in the proper manner, in the way it is supposed to be sent and in the way it is intended. The receiver might not be able to understand the message, or receiver might not be able to pass the proper feedback to the message. It is therefore important that the communicator seeks feedback to check that the message is clearly understood. So, in order to eliminate the barrier, the final step that you have to take is simply to see to it to check the feedback. The feedback should be as expected and not something which differs from that. So the feedback has to be traced, analyzed and studied, and the feedback would at the end determine whether your communication has been effective or whether there has been a barrier in your communication. So on this note, we end our discussion on barriers to communication and different points that we have discussed. To sum up, communication barriers are hurdles, hindrances in the path of communication. They occur in different types. They could be internal, such as personal or linguistic and semantic, or external, such as we have the ones like physical barriers, and steps and measures could be taken to eliminate these barriers, and our communication would be more effective if we have a sound knowledge of how to eliminate these barriers. Thank you all.